I'm Karen Varga with CEA World Greenhouse Produce, an innovative brand that engages with the rapidly expanding global greenhouse produce industry through a variety of platforms. Our mission is to educate and connect greenhouse produce growers and industry allies to help them better understand and sustainably advance the global food industry. On this episode of CEA Talks, I'll be speaking with Rose Séguin, an agronomist for Solemn Technologies, which is an LED grow light manufacturer in Montreal, Canada. Rose has had an interesting journey through agriculture and is here today to share her thoughts on CEA in Northern Canada. Rose, welcome to CEA Talks.
Thank you.
So what motivated you to go into agriculture as a career? It's my understanding that wasn't really what you were thinking about going into initially.
Yeah, it wasn't it wasn't something that I initially wanted to do. For me, I did my high school in Northern Ontario, though it wasn't really something people were doing there. So when you talk with your counselors and whatnot, no one's talking about agriculture. So it really wasn't initially on my radar. It was much more on biology and sciences. And just at some point before submitting applications, I figured, let's give this a shot. That sounds really interesting. It's, I felt like I maybe had more strength in that. Initially, there was a lot of talk about, biology and medical and stuff. And I just figured I didn't want to do that. And then plants just kind of came up as something that would be really interesting. The fact that no one was talking about it, I think probably also factored in where I figured I haven't heard nearly enough about this. So why not study it?
And so from there, what specifically interested you about food production in Northern Canada?
Probably a similar vein in terms that it didn't seem like people were talking about it a whole lot. I think, for us here in Canada, it just naturally is very cold. Even here where I am in Quebec, we are still hitting some, minus 30 degrees Celsius in the winter. And so naturally, there's a lot of discussion around how do you do that better? And then, during my studies, I started hearing about some initiatives happening further up north. I reached out to one of my professors and said, look, I'm really interested in greenhouses in Canada and in some of these initiatives. And he put me in contact with the first project I worked on in Northern Quebec.
And can you tell me more about that project?
Yeah, so that project was basically it was in this Cree community called Chisasibi. They had, basically it had a Center for Sustainability as well as a teacher at the local high school that was really trying to develop some sort of a program around food security and also around producing food locally. And they were looking for people that had a bit more of a background in that to help get their small greenhouse going, but then also to basically have a 1 to 2 week training where for students that were interested in working in the summer, then we can kind of crash course it with them to get them going. And so I did that with them for 2 or 3 years, I believe. And then their goal initially was also to then build a commercial greenhouse. The pandemic kind of really threw a wrench in that. And so I'm hoping that they'll pick that up again. But, like a lot of communities, they were looking at ways to do it on a much larger scale so that they could just be more food secure, not be so reliant on transportation, which, during the winter months is very shaky in those areas.
And what other sorts of challenges do the growers in that area face that may be unique for their geography?
I mean, heating obviously is a very big challenge there, especially because in those regions, a lot of things are heated with diesel. So at least where they were, there's a lot of hydro dams in that specific area, so they were fine. But when it comes to a lot of other areas and other isolated areas in Northern Canada, they're reliant on diesel. And so that already, when your supply is very limited, you really need to think about where that energy is going. The fact that it's also dark so long during the summer, so you really have very few hours of sunlight. If anyone is trying to grow a tomato or a cucumber, basically up in Nunavut or in the Northwest Territories, you're basically now needing to provide a very, very high level of light. So that also in terms of operational costs is a really big expense, is, putting that money into lighting, putting it into the energy, but also for the transportation. So again, if some of these communities are not accessible necessarily by a good highway, then, you are limited in how you get, your whole greenhouse and then all of the technology up there. So that was kind of also interesting, is that for some places, the window was so small. So if you say, here you have a greenhouse, you're kind of building it partly, you can start it in the spring, you're fine, and go pretty late into the year. But over there, your window for growing is the same as your window for building. And so you basically need to plan it and say, in some places it was I'm getting my stuff by barge in June, and then I'll have it all built by the end of the year, but I can't start until next June, right? So in terms of like the logistics and the planning of it, that's also really complicated, or can be fairly complicated up north.
Okay. And then I know when you spoke with my colleague Dana, you had also talked about some of the social, economic, and political aspects that
Mm-hmm.
also might affect CEA and people being open to having a greenhouse in northern Canada. Can you talk about those a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely the fact that it's not something that people are used to doing up there. Also, that obviously has an impact. So you can't just put up a greenhouse and walk away and say, there you go, which, some people have tried doing in the past. I know there were some government research centers that back in the day set up to basically do that. And ultimately, those, if you don't have buy-in from the community, if you don't have especially like a leader within the community that is taking that on and is really bringing people together, your chance for success is a lot lower. So really making sure that you have a figurehead on that is really big. But then also having some funding to do that. So for example, in Canada, we have, there is like a certain envelope of funding for every province. And up north, if they're not typically agricultural producers, that envelope is a lot smaller, despite the fact that their costs are a lot higher. So that also, making sure that you can secure the funding to do those projects is another one, like more on the political, economic side. But then, basically looking up north, there's a very high percentage of people that are Indigenous and that also have their local food systems being threatened. So when you look at this, whether it's, because of the just because those systems are degrading with climate change, with, imported products and all of that, when you have all of those systems and then you're also trying to push greenhousing, you also need to kind of expect that some people are going to say, well, look, if I'm prioritizing my local food, I want to put the priority on something that's culturally relevant to me. And so there's really, it's the whole community buy-in and making sure that, basically the government structure is there to support, but then that you also have the community saying, yes, we do want this.
That's fascinating. That's a lot more than usually. I think a lot more thought goes into that area in that particular region, it sounds like.
Yeah, at least for me now, I'm working more on the commercial greenhouse side in the south, I guess, and in southern Canada. And it's completely different. It's not this privatized thing where basically growers are putting up 20 acres and, that's kind of independent of everyone else, right? Like up north, everything is really linked. And there's a lot of people that are just truly incredible and put so much thought into the whole thing. But I would say that it's a lot more, you rely on a lot of other factors, whereas commercially here down south, it's a very well-oiled machine. It has its own momentum.
So in your opinion, do you still believe that there's an opportunity for CEA up further north in Canada?
Yeah, I think there's definitely an opportunity. I think, like everything, even like greenhouses down south, even like vertical farming, it's all a matter of, just looking at the context that you're in and making sure, even for vertical farming, you need to have the social buy-in. You need to have people that say, I do want this product. So it's pretty well the same, when you go anywhere with any industry, is making sure that you have buy-in and that there is place for that. So I think that, as long as we're really looking at the whole context, at all of the costs that people are facing, at the things that they actually want to grow and eat, I think that there is still a pretty good chance for success. But yeah, it really is just about, saying you're not going to just go up as someone from down south and say, I'm going to put up a greenhouse and solve all of your problems. I'm going to build you a farm. That's not how it works. And so I think as soon as you come into it with that understanding and that you look for the right people within these communities and even the right industry partners that will help, that will really listen and try to understand that, then, you already have a much greater chance for success. And there are actually a lot of really good examples of it working up north already. So there's there's community greenhouses kind of all over the place, especially in the Yukon and Northwest Territories. The climate is a bit easier than Nunavut, let's say, but they do have a lot of really successful farms that are doing a fantastic job, and they have associations, and they really do stick together quite a lot and advocate for themselves. So there's already, wheels are already in motion, and then at that point it's just saying, where else can we go with it? Can we push further?
That's great. Sounds like there's quite the sense of community.
Yeah, it's the most unique and incredible thing up there. I mean, like, you can find community a little bit everywhere if you're looking, but I would say up north, easily, other than, the actual just location of it and the ruggedness and the view. Like the community is a second to none. Honestly, they're fantastic.
That's wonderful. Well, thanks so much for being with us today and sharing all of this. It's just, I mean, it really is, like I said, a fascinating situation, and I appreciate you sharing your perspective, Rose.
No, thank you for the opportunity.